The city exhaled its stale, damp breath into the alley, and Lena felt it seep right through her thin jacket. It was a cold that wasn't just about the weather. It was the cold of exhaustion, the cold of walking home long after the last bus had run, the cold of knowing the morning would come too soon with the same empty pockets and the same aching feet. 20 years old, and she felt like she'd been working at the diner for 100 of them, serving coffee and sympathy to people whose lives felt a world away from hers. The shortcut home was a jagged scar between two brick buildings leading past a forgotten lot overflowing with the city's metal skeletons. She usually kept her head down, her pace quick, but tonight a sound stopped her. It was low, a pained groan that snagged on the night air, pulling her attention toward a mountain of discarded junk. There, half swallowed by rust and weeds, sat the husk of an old car. Its paint peeled away like sunburnt skin. The sound came again from inside. Fear, sharp and sensible, told her to run, to keep walking, forget she heard anything, and lock her door behind her. But something else, a stubborn thread of compassion she couldn't afford but couldn't sever, held her feet to the cracked pavement. She moved closer, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The trunk was slightly ajar. With trembling hands she reached out, the cold metal biting at her fingertips. She lifted. The lid groaned open on rusted hinges, and the pale glow of a distant street lamp spilled inside, revealing the man crammed within. He was a canvas of blood and bruises, his fine black suit torn and stained, his dark hair matted to his forehead. He was European, maybe French, his features sharp and aristocratic, even under the grime and injury. His eyes, when they flickered open, were like chips of obsidian, holding a universe of pain and cold fury. He was groaning, not begging, a sound of pure animalistic agony. Lena should have screamed. She should have slammed the trunk shut and run until her lungs burned. But she didn't. She saw the deep gash on his temple, the Gatorade, unnatural angle of his arm, the shallow, ragged breaths he took. She saw a man, broken and dying in a heap of trash. And in that moment, her own exhaustion, her own poverty, her own fear, it all became secondary to the simple, profound reality of the man in front of her. He was hurt, and she was here. Lena made a decision that defied all logic, a choice born not of courage, but of a deep, unshakable empathy she didn't know she possessed. Getting him out of that trunk was the first challenge. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone, and every movement drew a sharp hiss of pain from his lips. She was strong from her years of carrying heavy trays and bus tubs, but this was different. This was the weight of a life. "I'm going to help you," she whispered, the words feeling thin and foolish in the oppressive silence of the junkyard. He didn't respond, his eyes closing again. But she felt a slight shift as he tried to use his one good arm to assist. It was enough. She looped her arms under his, pulling and straining, her worn sneakers slipping on the damp ground until he was finally out, half slumped against the side of the car. Her apartment was 3 blocks away, up 4 flights of rickety stairs. It felt like 100 miles. She supported him, his good arm slung over her shoulder, his side pressed against hers. He was taller than her, and with every step, his weight threatened to pull them both down. The city seemed to watch them, its windows like vacant eyes. No one came out. No one offered to help. They were just 2 shadows moving through a world that had long since learned to look away. The climb up the stairs was a special kind of hell. By the time they reached her door, she was gasping for air, her muscles screaming in protest. She fumbled with the key, the lock sticking as it always did before the door finally swung open into her tiny sanctuary. It wasn't much, a single room with a kitchenette, a mattress on the floor, and a small, clean bathroom. But it was hers. It was safe. She guided him to the mattress, the only soft place in the entire apartment, and he collapsed onto it with a shuddering groan. For a long moment, she just stood there breathing hard, looking at the peering of dangerous, bleeding stranger now lying in the center of her life. He was a Brutal intrusion, a harbinger of troubles she couldn't even begin to imagine. He was also just a man, hurt and helpless. She went to the bathroom and returned with her meager first aid kit, some antiseptic, a roll of gauze, and a bottle of cheap whiskey. She knelt beside him. "This is going to hurt," she said, her voice steadier now. He just watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes as she cleaned his wounds, his silence more unnerving than any scream would have been. He didn't speak for 2 full days. Lena went to work, her mind 1,000 miles away, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped a tray of plates. She'd call in sick, but she couldn't afford to lose the hours. So, she smiled at customers, refilled coffee cups, and pretended the bleeding man on her mattress didn't exist. Every time she came home, her heart hammered against her chest, half expecting to find him gone, half expecting to find police at her door. But each time he was right where she left him, sleeping a deep, healing sleep. She left him water and broth which he consumed when she was away. On the 3rd morning, she woke to find him sitting up, his back against the wall, watching her. The intensity of his gaze was a physical thing, a pressure in the small room. His injured arm was in a makeshift sling she'd fashioned from a dish towel. The bruises on his face had started to bloom into ugly shades of purple and yellow, but the cold fire in his eyes was undiminished. He looked less like a victim and more like a predator, resting, gathering its strength. "Why?" he asked. His voice was a low rasp, thick with a French accent, but the single word was perfectly clear. It hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken questions. "Why help me? Why risk this?" Lena just shrugged, pulling her worn robe tighter around herself. She walked to the small stove to make coffee, her back to him. "You were hurt," she said, as bent, if it were the simplest, most obvious reason in the world. People shouldn't be left to die in a pile of garbage. He was silent for a long moment, processing her answer. She could feel his eyes on her, dissecting her, trying to find the angle, the hidden motive. In his world, kindness was a currency, a transaction, a debt to be collected. Her simple, unconditional act was a language he didn't seem to understand. He finally spoke again, his voice harder this time. "I have money. A lot of it. I will pay you for your trouble." Lena turned, a tin coffee mug in her hand. She looked at him, at the faint arrogance that clung to him even now, the casual assumption that everything had a price. A spark of defiance, a pride she rarely got to show, flared within her. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not for sale. Just get better and then get gone." She turned back to her coffee, the conversation over. But she knew with a great certainty that chilled her to the bone that it wasn't over at all. This man was dangerous, tied to something powerful, and men like him didn't just get gone, they left ripples, and sometimes they left ruins. His name was Luke. He told her on the 5th day, his voice still rough but regaining its authority. He didn't offer a last name, and she didn't ask for one. He remained in her apartment, a silent, imposing presence who watched everything and said little. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. Even with his injuries, he was a man accustomed to power, to command, and it showed in the way he held himself, in the way his eyes missed nothing. Her tiny apartment, once her refuge, now felt like a cage she shared with a panther. The danger he represented was no longer an abstract fear. It was a living, breathing thing, sleeping on her floor. Lena's life continued its monotonous rhythm, but everything felt different, sharper. When she walked to work, she felt unseen eyes following her. A black Citroën sedan, sleek and European, was parked across the street from her, building for a whole day before disappearing. She started noticing men in dark suits who didn't belong in her neighborhood, their faces hard and watchful. They never approached her, but she felt their presence like a change in the air, pressure before a storm. She was living on a knife's edge, terrified of what he had brought to her door, yet a strange domesticity began to settle between them. He watched her come home, exhausted, And one evening he had taken the small pan and heated up the canned soup she left for him, setting a bowl on her small table. It was a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. He started observing her, truly seeing her. He saw the worn-out soles of her shoes, the way she carefully darned a hole in her work uniform, the sketchbook, filled with fashion designs she kept hidden under her mattress. He saw the dreams she had packed away, and the quiet dignity with which she faced her poverty. And she, in turn, saw glimpses of the man behind the fearsome reputation she had imagined. She saw the way his hands, which she knew could be his weapons, were surprisingly gentle when he rewrapped the gauze on his own arm. She heard him on the phone one night, speaking in rapid, hushed French, his voice a blade of cold steel. He was arranging things, giving orders, and she knew he was activating his network. The thought was terrifying, but then he would hang up, and the predator would recede, replaced by the quiet, watchful man sharing her space. "You should not be living like this," he said one night, gesturing vaguely at the peeling paint on the walls. "It is not suitable. It's what I've got," she replied, not with bitterness, but with a weary acceptance that seemed to bother him more than any complaint would have. The storm broke on a Tuesday. Lena was walking home, the meager tips from her shift clutched in her pocket, when she saw them. Two men, their postures stiff and predatory, were standing by the entrance to her building. They didn't belong. They wore cheap suits that couldn't hide the bulk of their shoulders or the coldness in their eyes. They were the men who had put Luke in that trunk. She knew it instantly. Her blood ran cold. She could turn around, run, but they had seen her. One of them smirked, a greasy, knowing look that made her skin crawl. He took a step toward her. Before he could take a second, the apartment door creaked open above them. Luke stood on the landing, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. He was no longer the broken man from the junkyard. He stood tall, his presence filling the desta, narrow space, radiating an aura of absolute, lethal authority. He was not healed, not even close, but he was whole in a way that mattered more. "Leave her alone," he said. The words were quiet, almost casual, but they landed like stones in the tense silence. The men on the street froze. They looked from Lena to the figure on the landing, their smirks faltering, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty, then recognition, then fear. They had left him for dead, and here he was. The bigger of the two men snarled, trying to reclaim his bravado. "We have business with you, Luke, not with the girl." Luke took a slow step down, then another. "You have no more business," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You have only mistakes." He moved with a speed that was terrifying. He was on them before they could react, a blur of motion. It wasn't a fight. It was a disassembly. There was the sharp crack of bone, a choked gasp, a wet thud. It was over in seconds. He left, them groaning and broken on the pavement, a mirror of how she had found him, and walked back to her. He stopped in front of her, his chest rising and falling, the adrenaline of the brief, brutal conflict making his eyes gleam. He looked at her, then at the gawking neighbors peering from their windows, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The secret was out. She wasn't just the quiet waitress from the diner anymore. She was the girl with the dangerous man. Lena's choice had now chained her to a world she never knew existed. The whispers started the next day. The police came, asking questions about the two men found beaten in the alley. But nobody, including Lena, had seen a thing. Luke simply looked at her, and she knew what to say. "I didn't see anything." It was the first lie she had ever told to law enforcement, and it felt like a brand on her soul. She was one of them now. She was part of his world. The aftermath of the alley confrontation settled over them like a shroud. That fear was gone, replaced by a heavy, unreachable quiet. Luke didn't leave. He couldn't. He had marked her. And in his world, that mark meant two things. She was a target, and she was his to protect. His world began to bleed into hers in ways that were both comforting and suffocating. A new lock appeared on her door, a heavy deadbolt she hadn't bought. A tall, silent man in a dark suit started spending his days in a car, parked down the street, his presence a clear and visible warning. Her landlord, a portly man who was always a week early asking for the rent, suddenly became polite, almost deferential. When her refrigerator, which had been rattling for months, finally died, a brand new one was delivered and installed the next day. She tried to object, to tell Luke she didn't want his gifts, his money. "It is not a gift," he said, his expression unyielding. "It is a necessity. You are my responsibility now." This is how I meet my responsibilities. He was building a fortress around her, brick by invisible brick. He was using his power, the very thing that terrified her, to make her life easier, safer. It was a strange and unsettling paradox. She felt cared for in a way she never had before, but she also felt like a bird in a gilded cage. He was taking away the sharp edges of her poverty, but he was also taking away her world, replacing it with his. She spent less time in her sketchbook and more time watching the silent bodyguard on the street. Her simple life, with all its hardships, had been her own. This new life, with its strange comforts and constant, humming, threat, belonged to him. One evening, she found him looking through her sketchbook, which she'd carelessly left on the table. She froze in the doorway, her heart seizing with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Those drawings were private, the last vestiges of a dream she'd all but given up on. He looked up, his face impassive, but his eyes held a new light. "These are yours?" he asked, his finger tracing the line of a dress she had designed. She nodded, unable to speak. "They are very good," he said simply. "You have a gift." He closed the book, gently, and pushed it toward her. A gift like this should not be hidden under a maîtresse. Coming from a man who dealt in violence and fear, the quiet sincerity of his compliment struck her with more force than any threat. He saw her not just as the woman who had saved him, not as a responsibility to be managed, but as a person with talents and dreams. In that moment, the powerful crime boss disappeared, and she saw only Luke, a man who understood the value of things hidden in the dark. The fragile peace they had built was predicated on a lie that they could keep his world from completely devouring hers. But his world was patient, and it was hungry. The quiet nights became their sanctuary. The city hummed outside her window, but inside the small apartment, a different kind of life was taking shape. They started to talk, really talk. He never spoke of the specifics of his business, the violence, the crime, the empire he commanded. Instead, he asked about her. He asked about her childhood, about the parents she barely remembered, about the string of foster homes that had eventually led her here. She told him things she had never told anyone, the stories coming out in a quiet, hesitant rush. She spoke of her dream of being a designer, of wanting to create beautiful things in a world that had shown her so little beauty. He listened with an unnerving stillness, his gaze never leaving her face. He absorbed her words, her history, her quiet pain, and held it with a reverence that stunned her. In return, he offered small pieces of himself. He told her about growing up in a stone villa in Corsica, about the rigid codes of honor and the crushing weight of a name he never chose. One night, he showed her the tattoo that covered most of his back, a magnificent, intricate serpent coiling in waves of black and gray ink. "It is a symbol of cunning, rebirth, and danger," he explained, his voice low. "But it is also a brand. It binds me to a life chosen for me long before I was born." She reached out, her fingers hesitantly tracing the serpent's scaled body on his skin. The touch was electric, a silent communication that transcended words. It was a moment of profound intimacy, a shared glimpse into the prisons they had. Both inhabited, his of duty, hers of poverty. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken longing. He was a pillar of the French milieu, a man of violence and death. She was a poor waitress who had shown him a kindness he never expected. They were from different universes, yet in this small room, their lonelinesses recognized each other. The practical arrangement of protector and protected, was slowly, irrevocably, transforming into something deeper, something more dangerous than any rival gangster. It was transforming into devotion. He started to smile. Not often, but sometimes a small, almost imperceptible quirk of his lips when she said something that amused him. And Lena found herself watching for it. That tiny crack in his formidable armor, with a yearning that frightened her. The rival clan that had left him for dead was not content to let him live. They had lost face, and in his world, that was a debt that could only be paid in 10. Blood. They came for him on a rain-lashed Thursday night when the city was a smear of neon and shadow. They didn't bother with the street. They came up the fire, escape, shattering her window, and pouring into the apartment like wraiths. There were 3 of them, armed with knives and a chilling silence. Lena's scream was cut short as one of them grabbed her, pressing the cold steel of a blade to her throat. "We'll take the girl first, Luke," the leader hissed, his eyes glittering with hate, "a payment for your disrespect." Luke, who had been sitting at the table, rose to his feet. The calm that fell over him was the most terrifying thing Lena had ever seen. It was the absolute stillness of a storm's eye. All the quiet gentleness she had come to know was gone, burned away by a cold, primal fury. "Let her go," he said, his voice deceptively soft, "and I will grant you a quick death." The man holding her just laughed, a ragged, ugly sound. It was the last sound he ever made. Luke moved. He was not just a fighter. He was an artist of violence. He used their momentum against them, turning their aggression into their own destruction. He disarmed the first man with a brutal twist of the wrist, using the man's own knife against him. He moved through the small, cluttered space of her apartment with lethal precision, a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Lena, in a surge of adrenaline-fueled clarity, did the one thing she could. She stomped down hard on the foot of the man holding her, and as he grunted in pain, she drove her elbow back into his gut. The knife clattered to the floor. The momentary distraction was all Luke needed. He was on the man in a heartbeat, and the fight was over. Silence descended, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing and the ragged breathing, drumming of rain against the broken window pane. The bodies of 3 men lay, still on her floor. Her home, her sanctuary, had become a tomb. Luke stood in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving, a small cut bleeding on his cheek. He looked at her, his eyes wild with the violence he had just unleashed, and she saw a flicker of fear in them. Not for himself, but for her. He was afraid of what she was seeing, afraid that the monster he kept caged inside had finally broken free and would drive her away forever. But she didn't run. She walked toward him, stepping over a fallen enemy, and gently touched the cut on his cheek. "You're bleeding," she whispered. The aftermath was a blur of quiet, chilling efficiency. Luke made a single phone call, and within 20 minutes, his people arrived. They were silent, professional, moving through her apartment with a practiced ease that spoke of countless scenes like this one. They took the bodies, cleaned the blood from her floorboards, and boarded up the broken window. Within an hour, it was as if the brutal home invasion had never happened. Save for the lingering scent of antiseptic and the deep, unshakable tremor in Lena's hands, the apartment, once a symbol of her independence, now felt violated, tainted. The sanctity of her small world had been shattered forever. When his men had gone, they were left alone in the wreckage. Luke stood by the boarded-up window, looking out at the rain-slicked street below. "This is my world, Lena," he said, his back to her. His voice was heavy with a sorrow she had never heard from him before. "This violence, this death, it follows me. I brought it to your door." He finally turned to face her, his expression grim. "I never should have stayed. I have endangered you beyond measure." He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I am the head of the Corsican milieu. My enemies are legion. By helping me, you have made them your enemies too." He laid it all bare, the ugly truth of his identity, without excuse or apology. He was giving her the full picture, showing her the monster she had harbored. I will give you a choice, he continued, his voice low and formal. I can give you enough money to disappear. A new life, anywhere you want. New name, new identity. You will be safe, and you will never have to see me or this life again. He paused, and his composure cracked for just a second, revealing the deep, raw vulnerability beneath. Or you can stay with me, and I swear on the honor of my family, no one will ever harm you again. But you will be in my world, forever. He was offering her an escape, a return to normalcy paid for in blood money. Or he was offering her himself a life of gilded danger and fierce, unwavering protection. He was offering her a prison of safety. He was offering her love, forged in violence. The choice was hers. Lena looked around her small apartment. The new refrigerator hummed quietly in the corner, a gift of his protection. The floor was clean, scrubbed of the blood that had been spilled on it, a testament to his power. The boarded-up window was a scar, a permanent reminder of the night his world had crashed into hers. For a moment, she thought of her old life, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the endless struggle to make ends meet. It was a hard life, but it had been simple. It had been hers. She could take his money and run. She could go to California or Paris, or anywhere the dreams in her sketchbook took her. She could be free, but she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she would never be free of him. His ghost would follow her. The memory of his quiet strength, his surprising gentleness, the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. She looked at Luke. He stood there, a king in a kingdom of shadows, offering her everything and nothing. He was danger and safety, chaos and order, a cage and a sanctuary, all at once. He was the head of a crime syndicate, a man who had killed in her home to protect her, and she loved him. The realization didn't come with a crash of lightning, but with a quiet, steady dawn of understanding. Love wasn't about safety or simplicity. It was about seeing someone for everything. They were the darkness and the light, and choosing to stand with them anyway. I don't want your money, she said, her voice clear and strong in the quiet room. It was the same thing she had told him when he first woke up, but the words meant something entirely different now. Then it had been a statement of pride. Now it was a vow. A small, almost imperceptible wave of relief washed over his features. He took a step toward her, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. My world is a dark place, Lena, he whispered, his eyes searching hers for any sign of, I doubt. I know, she said, leaning into his touch. But I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of homecoming. It was a promise of a shared future, a life built not on a foundation of normalcy, but on the rubble of who they used to be. They left the next morning, walking away from the little apartment without a Danterson's backward glance. She carried only her sketchbook. He carried the weight of his empire. Together they stepped out into the city, two people from different worlds bound by an act of kindness in a junkyard, ready to face the darkness side by side. For home, she had learned, was not a place with four walls. It was the steady presence of the person who saw you, who fought for you, and who chose you even when they knew they shouldn't.